Awesome. Well, first off, thank you so much for doing this. How's your day been?
It's been pretty good. You know, always happy to put new work out and yeah, feeling good.
Love to hear it. And yeah, we'll definitely be talking about the wonderful new project Blooms towards the end of this hour, but wanted to start by just kind of taking a little bit of a walk back into time. And I'm in the front corner of the room with the three Gerber daisies. I know you mentioned that these were the first three NFTs that you ever minted. And knowing that you've been involved in code-based art since 2014, I mean, that's quite a bit of gap from August 2021 from when you did mint those. So, what led you to minting these daisies and just why flowers in the first place?
So, somewhat of an interesting story. I was really trying to get an invite to Foundation, and at the time it was invite only, and I couldn't find an invite. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll just mint something, that I was working on directly on OpenSea. Um, so that's sort of how this happened. Is I had this idea to start working with some flowers. I've been growing flowers in my backyard, and I was always sort of fascinated by flowers and flowers in art. And so I created this series, 12 views of a Gerber daisy, which is the same image, but sort of 12 different colorways, and yeah, minted it directly to OpenSea. And then I think maybe a few days later, I sourced an invite to Foundation and started minting on Foundation, and almost completely forgot about this series. And then a collector at some point reached out to me and said, "Hey, I found this thing on OpenSea," and then people started collecting it. So it sort of it almost came secondary after a whole bunch of work on Foundation started selling.
It's funny, it was almost like the lost flowers
Yeah.
that people had to discover. That's awesome. And I mentioned that you started, it looks like, doing code-based art in 2014. So between 2014 and 2021, when you minted that project, I mean, what were you working on? Kind of how did your journey come to NFTs in the first place?
Yeah. So I had gone back to school in 2013 to get sort of a more formal education in software development. I was mostly self-taught up to that point, and wanted to sort of continue my career. And I think it was the day I graduated, or very soon thereafter, I discovered processing. And I had absolutely no idea that you could sort of make art with code. It just wasn't like in my consciousness as a thing that was out there, even though you had people doing it with Flash in the 90s and earlier. It just wasn't something I was really aware of, but I was always somewhat involved in art in some way, mostly just in a very personal journey. I wasn't really going to a lot of events and part of any kind of community. Just since I was very young, I painted. And it was just something I continued through college and after college. So then when I realized you could make art with code, I got a job as a software developer, but immediately started just for fun, writing processing sketches and experimenting. And then slowly over time, saw a community on Twitter and started posting very, very, very infrequently. Um, and then there's a whole other story about plotters that, I won't go down that road right now. But yeah, that's just how I got started. Is just the passion and love of art and creating art. And I was, I was getting married and then having kids, and I just did not have a lot of time to paint. So I found a way to create art through digital art, which didn't require me to, have all these supplies and a sort of a setup to make paintings and store paintings and turpentine because I was using oil paints. So yeah, digital art just like really made a lot of sense, and I just fell in love with it.
That's amazing. And yeah, I mean, as far as that journey that you had from coding to art, it seems like I've heard it's a fairly frequent story. which is just so cool to see. It's like, okay, I have this very technical like profession. I want to figure out how to make this more fun, and this is a perfect way to kind of do that. And going back to what Danielle King said on her last walk and talk, like she really enjoyed AI art because of she can just bring her laptop around and that's her canvas. Like she doesn't need to bring the paints, the paint brushes, and everything that goes along with it. So I think similar to code based art using processing, it's the same thing. If you have your laptop, you've got your studio right there. So I love that story.
Yes, but I did not give up on my love of painting, which
Yes, and
is,
we will
you know
definitely
what?
get
Yeah, okay.
that. Yes, I think it's the perfect. We'll get to bloom and then blooms and just kind of combining the two, and we'll definitely get to plotters as well, since I know that's such a big part of your work. But first of all, just wanted to say that I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for quite some time. There's two moments that really stand out to me. First, you introduced me to the legendary Dave Bull, the Japanese woodblock print artist, and
Ah,
just
yes.
going through all of his YouTube videos. And we can have a full session on this another time. But the second one was a podcast that I found that you were on back in 2019. And you were talking about code based art, NFTs, blockchain was never mentioned, but what you were talking
Mm.
about there still rings so true to today. And you also shared a list of resources and inspirations, and I think it would be cool to kind of read off some of those that you had there. So for early generative artists that you liked, Vera Molnar, Frieder Nake, current generative artists, keep in mind this is 2019, generative artists and plotter artists, Tyler Hobbs, Ben Kovach, Matt Delorier, Manolo, Casey Reese, John Maeda, Jared Tarbell, AI artists, Robbie Barrett, Mario Klingerman, learning resources, Art Gnome, The Coding Train, influential artists, Piet Mondrian, Saul LeWitt. I mean, these names are just absolutely legendary then, and they still are today. So I wanted to get to plotting now because you mentioned plotter artists back in 2019. So I know that was a big part of kind of that switch, and I'm sure on Twitter that was something that was going on with the plotter Twitter's hashtag. So kind of how did you get introduced to the plotter, and how did it become such a kind of prevalent part of your practice?
Wow. So just so everyone knows, I had no idea you were going to bring that up about that podcast from 2019, which was actually something I did for my day job. As a software developer, I was very involved in a platform called Heroku, and they asked me to do sort of a podcast about anything I wanted. So I was like, "Hey, let's talk about art." And so this was entirely for work, like my day job, and I have not listened to that podcast or looked at that list of artists that you just mentioned. So it's actually kind of interesting to me that, at least what I said back then, like before I ever minted, before I knew about blockchain and NFTs, still holds true today. I didn't say anything that was too, out there. Um, so regarding the plotter, um, I don't know the first instance that I discovered like what a plotter was. I had no idea about plotters probably before 2016. I think it was sometime around 2017 that I discovered Evil Mad Scientist and the AxiDraw. And what I saw about it was, hey, you could turn the digital art back into like physical drawings. And this resonated with me because it completed sort of this circle. So I could write code at my computer, iterate and create these outputs, and then turn them into a physical drawing. Like this to me was the light bulb moment when I realized this is the path that I want to follow. Um, just given my background, but from those earliest moments, I wanted to figure out how to make a painting because I was a painter. And I hadn't seen a lot of people, or really anyone, back then, try to do sort of larger scale paintings or even smaller scale paintings. um, so that's sort of how it all first started. It took me, I think, a few years to work up the courage to even buy my first plotter, which was the AxiDraw. The largest it could do in a standard canvas size, though, was 11 by 14, which was really small. And I do have a video on my Twitter feed from way back when of the very first painting I ever made. And I was 3D printing these tubes and using acrylic paint only out of convenience. I had never used acrylics before, but I knew I could thin it and it would dry quickly and it would just be easier than oil paint. So I 3D printed these tubes. I started experimenting with different viscosities of paint and just made this kind of like a drip dot painting from a photograph that I had made, and I color separated the layers. And literally, that code probably still exists. I mean, that was in processing Java. Now it's all, now I do everything in P5 and JavaScript. But like that code is probably still in my, like master code base when I make something plottable. Um, so, that's just sort of how it all started. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it seems like you go down a path and you just keep kind of pulling on that thread to see where it goes. And I think it kind of culminated into this beautiful combination of nature, physical, digital, and kind of all the work. So that's really, really interesting to get a little bit more of that backstory. So let's walk
Yeah.
to the animated flowers that we have on the far wall here. I know these are the three
Mm,
animated pieces that we have from flowers that you took in your backyard, which is pretty cool. And in that interview that you had back in 2019, you brought up the phrase algorithmic botany, where we're
mm.
mimicking nature. And again, like what you're saying in 2019 and what we're talking about today really rings true. So to kind of bring it back to the artwork on the wall, please tell us about these animated pieces that we have in front of us.
Yeah, so I wasn't sure how I felt about animation. It wasn't like really top of mind, but I felt like it was a challenge and something I really wanted to try. So I took these three photographs of flowers, as you said, that were growing in my garden, and I wanted to somehow like, animate the movement. But at the same time, it's not, these are not photographs that you're looking at, right? These are just entirely individual brushstrokes, I think around 40,000 individual brushstrokes. And, I didn't want to just, it's so easy to like take a photograph and sort of digitize it and make it look like a painting or something like that, like almost like a filter. And that's not what I was interested in. So these three digitals were all painted. They're all turned into physicals, and I color match everything. So meaning the paint in my code is matched to a line of paint that I'm going to use. So I don't approximate the color. I'm literally making the color. The only colors that I use, which is one of my limiting factors, is the paint, the line of paint that I'm going to paint it with. So if you look at like the first one, the pinkish one on the left, it might look like it has this, maybe a large gradation of color, but it's more of a trick of the eye. I forget how many exact colors there are. It's probably listed on Foundation, but I would be surprised if it was more than somewhere between 15 and 20 total colors. And again, these are all plottable pieces that were turned into, I think, 24 by 24 inch paintings. So yeah, so I think I had COVID around this time, and I was sitting in bed and just like hacking away because I was trying to figure out how to make it, an infinitely looping animation, but still have, you wouldn't be able to tell like where it started and stopped, and something you could just kind of stare at and get lost in. And I was really happy with the way these paintings came out. I didn't make it into a larger series, but yeah, it was like part of my earlier exploration with acrylics and plotters and paint.
It's amazing. And yeah, I mean, when I was putting this gallery together and just looking at these up close, they're absolutely mesmerizing. So I highly encourage everybody just to stare at your screen and just get absolutely lost in the movement. It's phenomenal.
Thank you.
Amazing. Well, let's continue our journey here. We can just kind of flip around to spring days. So it seems like we're zooming out a little bit. We're getting closer to kind of blooms in the sense that we're looking more at a landscape than kind of the single flower. So what kind of led to this kind of macro lens that we're looking at as far as like a whole generative landscape compared to just focusing on the individual flower?
So this is interesting. So spring day number one, I think this is spring day number one and maybe number two or three. This was made before the three animated flowers behind us. So here, this was like a big challenge for me. So I had put three digitals on foundation, and the three paintings sold. And I'm sorry, the three digitals sold. And I was like over the moon. I had like no idea what was going on at this point. Like I didn't understand ETH and blockchain like super well. But I really wanted to do a digital physical. So even from like the earliest days, um, so I would call this like my fourth and fifth NFT, not including sort of the lost flowers from OpenSea. Um, so I decided to do three digital physicals that would all come framed, and I would ship it framed. And they were large. They were like 24 by 30 with a border and then with a matting and then framed. So these were photographs that I had printed, 24 by 30, and I gessoed them with clear gesso to put like a tooth on top of the photograph that I could then put paint on top of the photographic print that wouldn't touch the print itself. So like a separation layer, but it was mostly transparent. So I just sort of experimented with this idea and it worked. And the reason I did it on top of a photograph was at the time I didn't have the confidence that I could make a painting on canvas. Like take a blank canvas, put it in a plotter and make a painting. That had not actually happened yet. So to make it work, I figured let me take a photograph and then I'll plot the strokes on top of the photograph, and I could use a lot. I could use far fewer strokes to accomplish, sort of a painterly look. So that's what these were. These are I made three plottable pieces. I think I listed them for at the time 1 ETH, which people were like, "Why is it so cheap?" um, and yeah, and they sold, and I would say these three, two of the collectors were bigger names, and it really helped. I would say, sort of kickstart my career as a digital and digital physical artist.
It's amazing. And yeah, just the experimentation that you do combining the physical with the digital has been something that I've been fascinated about your work, especially being able to see Bloom at the Tender Gallery at Untitled. Just like seeing it up close and personal is pretty impressive. And especially when people see the videos of your plotters in action, it's just quite the setup. So it's really something just to hear kind of the background of this. And I know just from zooming in, it's kind of like a starry night brushstroke compared to some of your other work. And I think the newest project, Blooms, kind of has like a similar feel to me. But
Mm.
what makes you want to kind of have this more painterly look versus more of like a, I guess, like if we look behind at the animated, it almost looks more like photorealistic. So
Yeah.
what's the difference and like what's your intention behind that?
So I think that I was also on top of being a painter, I was also a photographer. So the initial entry point for me into this digital art was not to take sort of like flow fields and circle packing and a lot of maybe the standard like entry points and try to make generative art from that. But I wanted to use my photography. So that's why I would say, these have more of that photographic feel to it. But I was also a painter and trying to achieve a painterly look, but in a more pure digital form that I could then paint that wouldn't rely on or exclusively on photography. And that's eventually where Soul came in, which was not a flower project, but was my first project that did not really use photography and was more of a long form project. But I used the techniques that I had learned from being able to sample from photos and do different things with it to make a photoless long form project that had a different look to it. And then from that project, sort of everything's really sort of come from Soul in a sense, in terms of like trying to achieve that more digital but painterly aesthetic and trying to not make it look like something you might have seen before, but something different, something new.
Yeah, no, I think so on. We don't have that in this gallery right now, but I definitely recommend people taking a look at that after this because yeah, that's just another excellent collection within kind of the nature realm that I highly recommend people checking out. Well, we're almost at blooms here. There's two other projects that I wanted to quickly touch on. I guess this is more of a continuation of Spring Days. This is Spring Day V2. So if we go on the other side of the wall of Spring Days V1, I picked two out that I really enjoyed, Sakara and then Down by the River. I mean, these are
Mm.
just two stunning pieces. And I'm assuming that these are from photographs as well. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. Either photographs or so the one on the left photograph, the one on the right is like a collage, like a photo collage.
Got it. Did you take these photos like on a trip or were these photos that you found?
The one on the left was like across the street from where I live. Um, and the one on the right, I think it was like an amalgam of, sort of stuff in my archive.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, these are phenomenal pieces. And as we look at to the one on the right, I mean, I see a lot of the blooms, the most recent projects kind of coming through in here, especially with kind
Mm,
of the center area having that color, the petals around it. So
yeah.
I can definitely see how we're getting closer to where we're about to end up here. But before we got to blooms, I do want to just quickly hit on a singularity here. The two that I picked out, I really enjoyed. One's like kind of that cyanotype, and the other one almost reminds me of like a fossilized flower. So I'm curious just how you kind of think of this project in the canon of your overall work.
Yeah. I what I loved about Singularity was again trying to think of things both from like a mathematical perspective, but also um, from more of a like a cosmic perspective, um, where you have this idea that everything sort of comes from this one single point and explodes outward. So I studied astronomy, cosmology in college, and I was very big on sort of like photographing the night sky for a time in my life. Um, so I think this sort of hints at some themes that I'd like to continue to explore in the future. This idea of sort of the cosmos and the universe, and you can look at a flower and sort of see the birth of an entire world. And that was sort of the metaphor for this project.
I love it. And yeah, I did not know about your college background. That's really really interesting. How you I'm sure there's many ways that you'll be able to combine that into your artistic practice as well.
We'll see.
Awesome. Well, now it's time. Let's talk blooms. So we started at generative daisies in August 2021. Now we're here in the spring of 2024, and you just launched blooms in collaboration with Tender on Verse. I know the pre-sale was today, but just wanted to learn a little bit more. Just tell us about the project. The My favorite line from the description or the quote that you used: "The flower is a prompt to stop and enjoy the vibrancy of life." Kind of what you just talked about, singularity. I think understanding that and just getting that perspective is always great. And I've always absolutely loved flowers as well. They're just like, how can you not? So I would love to hear just kind of what blooms means to you, and just tell us more about this project as a whole.
Yeah. So as some people may know, it started out as a collaboration with Tender, and was exhibited. I made three plottable pieces from the original version of the algorithm using oil pastels, which is a material I've never used before. And I made these three paintings, which were on display at the Untitled Art Fair in Miami during Art Basel Week. And I really I felt like a lot was left unsaid, sort of with the algorithm. Um, and Adam and I had wanted to work together for a sort of a longer form project for nearly a year, which hadn't yet come together. So I decided to continue working on blooms, um, and I think for me, it was definitely like a culmination in all of the color work from previous projects, the ideas around color and form and shape, and trying to express something different, and using the techniques that I had built up, these techniques around photography, but there is no photography here, and not that it looks any kind of photorealism, or like it came from a photo, but it uses a lot of those techniques. And it just seems, like a rabbit hole that at least I could explore, for the next 20 years. There's just so much around this technique that I want to keep working on. What I didn't expect though was I was expecting a much more sort of brighter looking series, and by brighter I mean like a daytime, kind of motif, and maybe for lack of a better word, happier. Not that this isn't happy, but there's a deeper feeling and emotion that I get, at least from looking at these, and I think also with Adam's sort of help in looking at the outputs and talking about the outputs. And we both have a very similar philosophy on life and sort of what it all means. So I think it took a deeper turn, and I am just in love with sort of the contrast and the darker, almost evening glow or evening light that you get from a lot of these.
No, that's amazing. And I mean, the more that I explored this project and from looking at the outputs on Verse, I mean, there's just so many different emotions that come into play. Like, it's not just bright and happy, there's just so much
Right.
more to it. And like you're mentioning before about just like enjoying the vibrancy of life, like sometimes life doesn't always take the best turn. Like, there's going to be ups and downs. And I think this project kind of encapsulates just what living is and represents it through the color work that you do, through the form, and like especially some of the darker pieces I think are really powerful. And you were mentioning before around color constraints that you mapped like the physical to the digital. Because like your color choice in this one is it's it's excellent, but it's also kind of all over the place. So please tell us more about like how you thought about color with this, just because it's so wide ranging. But again, if you
Mm.
zoom out and look at the project as a whole, like they all work so well together.
Yeah. So I started with, as I always do, sort of like a line of paint, that I sample color from, and here I wrote some code to sort of, since I wasn't going to be plotting these exactly, um, I had a little more freedom to mix, a little more freedom with the transparency, because I didn't have to worry about could I translate it from the digital to the physical. So I would take a color and I might, by some percentage, modify it to be a different color, and I might loop over that color, one time or 10 times, and then generate this sort of temporary palette from, let's say, 20 colors. So from 20 colors, you might increase it to 900 colors. And then of those 900 colors in the palette, 120 might end up getting used. So it was a totally sort of different approach to color, and the point of that was to explore these very strange and different possibilities. And that's why I did not feel like this made sense as like a blind minting experience, or even a collector curated experience. I mean, it could have been a collector curated, but I in this instance really wanted to have my vision of the algorithm, whereas Atmospheres was entirely collector curated. This being artist curated, I felt like I wanted it to be more about me, as the artist and my vision, for what I was feeling. So I loved this process of just going not wild with color, but taking some finite number and then blowing it out and then seeing how the algorithm might use a limited set of that and then never use it again, right? Like every single every single piece in the collection is a unique set of colors, even though some of them ended up having some similarity, which I also found interesting. And maybe that was more of a taste thing than what it was possible of doing. But you know, each piece is completely unique in its use of color.
That's really interesting. Yeah, thank you for kind of walking us down that path. And again, you've been working on this algorithm now for some time, but in creating blooms, what was the biggest surprise in the algorithm or some of the outputs that kind of even like you didn't even have any idea how something like that would be possible, or what really surprised you or shocked you in that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. I mean, there was a certain style of output, that I gravitated towards, and there's one piece that just comes to mind right now that I posted about. It's all pretty much all red, and that to me was like really shocking that it was all red, but discernible. I think maybe discernible given in the context of the rest of the collection what it was, but it was just more interpretive. It didn't have a lot of the leaves and grass and stems. It was, almost like a wall of red flower. And I don't know, that one struck me, as like unexpected. Um, that, and then I think again with sort of just having someone to converse with, like Adam, because I was actually discounting some of the really deeper, darker ones. And I think I had to think a lot about this because we disagreed, and I didn't see what he was seeing at first. And I think it's because I've always wanted to create art that makes people feel good, and I come from that approach because I think there is so much pain in the world, and if I'm gonna make art, I want it to be somewhat therapeutic. There's nothing better in this world when you make a connection with a piece of art, right? Like you love it, you hold on to it, you don't sell it, you cherish it, you display it, you show it, right? Like that to me is the point. So, you can create things that shock or things that are kind of like eye candy or whatever it might be. And I'm not saying anything about anything, but for me personally, I want to make something that hits you on a certain level, and it's not going to be for everyone. So again, I was trying to get to that brighter, happier kind of place. Um, but I think that this accomplishes that in a different way. And I think just as my development as an artist, I don't know. I'm just I couldn't be prouder. I'm so happy with how it all turned out, and I really give a lot of credit to Adam, and I think to any artist out there, right? Like finding people to work with. It doesn't have to be this solitary thing and question everything you do. Having someone to bounce things off of is so important. It can really help you see things in a different way.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, Adam is the best, and I'm not surprised that when he gets involved in something, it just makes it that much better. So that's I'm glad that you guys were able to kind of take this to the next level. And just as a collector, I think when I started, I'd really look for just like easy on the eyes, nice colors, makes me feel happy. But like as I've collected more and more, like some of the moody, like just I want to really feel something. And like
Yeah.
the feeling doesn't always need to be happiness. Like there could be other
Yes.
feelings going on. And like in the description, like the diversity of life. Like we have the diversity of emotion, diversity of feelings, and it's not always great all the time. And I think art that can encapsulate that, and especially as you zoom out and you have a collection that you have the happy moments, you have the sad moments, the gloomy moments, I think all of that just makes this project here and just talking about the flower. Because I mean, a flower starts from the ground, it grows up, and then it ends as well. So I think there's just a lot of really nice analogies, and I'm glad that we kind of got the full potential range of it from that collaboration with Adam.
Yeah.
So for blooms here, I know you mentioned bloom, you did the oil plotter work. Are there going to be plotter works on the physical side, or are you going to be sticking with prints for the collectors?
For now, for now, Prince. But we'll see. I don't know. All things are possible.
Love it. I mean, just knowing from how much you love to plot things, I guess I wouldn't be all that surprised if this ended up being plotted in some way, shape, or form. But
Well, let me say this because I see Raptor News here. Um, I do have a lot of oil paintings to make for Epiphanies. So I know I do have a lot of stuff still to do, sort of for that project, and definitely going to be focusing on that for a bit. But yeah, I don't know. I can't help myself in some sense to make things plottable. And listen, technically, this is plottable. Every bloom is a series of strokes that could be translated to a plotter to replicate in some way, shape, or form. And I wanted to sort of keep it loose like that, not get rid of the plottability, but not try to focus on replicating exactly what you see here in the digital into a physical. But maybe there's some other dimension to it that's still left to be explored.
that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, so does that mean like each of these has an SVG file to plot? Is that how you typically allow just like file types for these works?
Yeah, so I can save out SVG. I could save out one SVG for every color, or just a single SVG file of every
Interesting.
stroke. Yeah,
Huh. That is quite fascinating. And I think just like the constraints that like you put yourself under with everything being plottable, with each color matching digital to physical, it's interesting how sometimes these constraints lead to even more creativity because you know your overall bounds.
yeah, and that's a great point because, like, for me, I'm overwhelmed by the sheer possibilities, which are infinite, right? Like, I mean, I am just overwhelmed by that thought of how much you could do and how many ways you can go. So to put these limiting factors on myself, I think it just helps to focus you. At least that's just me personally, but it's helped me keep everything somewhat, keep me from going too insane.
That's very, very fair. I mean, with everything going on, I feel like there's just, again, there's endless possibilities in the digital world. So I think having those constraints is really helpful to help artists to kind of put up some type of like blockers so you can just like move ahead on a project. So I feel like otherwise you just are looking at every shiny object and it can get pretty distracting along the way.
Yeah, and even if you look on your left at singularity, the two singularities on the wall, they're plottable. I tried plotting it. I kept tearing up the paper because it wasn't really optimized. There's so many overlapping lines. But again, like it is technically plottable, and it almost comes down to time, right? Like I could probably figure it out, and maybe someday at some point I'll revisit some of these projects and do something physical with them. So for me, I feel like I'm laying the groundwork for future work, and building building my work around these central themes, and you know again, like it's sort of infinite. Even with these constraints, there's just so much to still explore.
Yeah, I mean, that leads me into my next question of, I mean, you've been on this generative flower journey now for quite a few years. I mean, what motivates you to keep exploring it, and what do you kind of see as maybe the next kind of back alley that you're going to walk down to see what you find?
Well, when I figure that out, I'll let you know. I don't know what I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't have a plan. It's really the way I like to look at it is I'm going to go on walks, and I'm going to meditate, and I'm going to figure it out. Because I don't think, the more you try to force it, the further away you get from where you should be. And when you let it happen naturally, it's a beautiful thing. Sometimes I make decisions by just listening. Sometimes my kids will like hand me a drawing, and I'll look at it and I'll go like, all right, now I know what to do. I mean, really, it's as
That's
simple as that.
incredible.
It's just trusting the universe to help you. I don't know. It may sound weird, but I'm a man of science and art, and I think they go together more than people realize.
No, I am definitely in that same camp. And I mean, I've been rereading Rick Rubin's The Creative Act. I think I'm on read number three. And I mean,
Oh
he
wow.
talks so much about just manifesting things and finding things in the places that maybe you wouldn't necessarily think you would find them. So I'm all about that. And like nature walks, I walk around my city, like that's when I have like the best ideas or questions that I want to ask artists. Like it happens when I'm not focusing on that thing. Like, do
Right.
you have certain like rituals or routines that help you kind of find that creative energy?
It's not easy, and it's not supposed to be easy. But you know, it's easy to say, "Oh, I'll meditate or I'll go for." It's sometimes it's hard, even in one full week, to find time to do that. Um, so I don't have like a great routine, and sometimes I feel very disconnected from any kind of creative source. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer.
No, I mean, it's not easy to come by, and I mean that's why I think just being patient and not forcing yourself allows you to kind of have that space to have inspiration find you. Because yeah, I think anytime you put unnecessary like time deadlines or anything along those natures, it makes it much harder to find the true meaning in something or like the true form that it should be taking. So yeah, I mean it's not easy, but it's clear that you're able to find this inspiration and creativity just from looking around this gallery.
Thank you.
I did want to ask about the quote that you used in the description from Eckhart Tolle. So I was not familiar with him. So I'm curious why you decided to use that quote in the description and kind of tell us more about kind of what that means to you.
Do you want to read it for everyone?
Yes, that is a great idea. So without fully realizing it, flowers would become for us an expression and form of that which is the most high, most sacred, and ultimately formless within ourselves. Flowers more fleeting, more ethereal, more delicate than the plants out of which they emerged, would become like messengers from another realm, like a bridge between the world of physical forms and the formless. Like, wow.
It's an amazing quote, and you know, Adam did source that quote, and I read it and I go, wow, like, yeah, that's got to be in the description. But yeah, I think it really encapsulates the feeling of the project. It encapsulates how I feel, about flowers, and that, flowers as a metaphor, for so many things. And I don't know, you know, too much of what I can say about it. I think everyone can read it and sort of feel what they feel from it. Um, but for me, it was like, you know, just an absolutely perfect representation of what I wish I could say myself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a phenomenal quote and ties up just what we've been talking about and just the overall description of the piece. So again, well done, Adam. Great find on that one. It's amazing how people they have these thoughts and then we can just conform them into, like, an artist can say something that we can't even say ourselves, but they can say it so perfectly. So that's awesome. A few last questions that I had, just kind of more general. And I know we were just talking about technology and staying focused, but in a world where technology makes it so easy to be connected to others on Twitter or Farcaster, how do you stay connected to yourself and your artistic craft?
Hmm. I don't know. How do I stay connected to myself and my artistic craft? A lot of staring. A lot of staring out into nothing. I don't know. Yeah, I go through every emotion you could possibly imagine, when creating. It it's not it's just not it's not easy. And it's not, it's probably not supposed to be easy. Um, I think to answer your question, how do you stay connected? I think it's when you're creating, does it feel good or does it feel forced? Um, does it feel like something you would look at on a wall and be like, wow? Or are you making something for someone else? Do you feel like you're making something for other people, as opposed to yourself? Because I try to make things for me, and if others connect with it, then that's great. I guess that's how I try to stay connected. You know.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I think, again, being true to who you are as an artist and as a person allows just everybody to kind of tap in to that humanity, and especially looking at blooms and how it ties into just our life as humans and kind of the cyclical nature of it. I think having that as kind of the backbone makes a ton of sense. And I never like to hear if artists are making art for somebody else. That's just, in my opinion, not how it should be made. It should be made for you, and then us as the viewers can kind of envision ourselves in, like, through your eyes to kind of get the most out of it. But I guess that's just my opinion. I'm sure there's other ones
No,
out there.
I've done commissions, in the past, and I love being able to work, directly with a collector. I would say it's more challenging and harder, right? Because it's you're creating something, but you're creating it now for this audience of one. And there's nothing wrong with it, and I still love doing it, but it's definitely hard and harder in a sense. Just to sort of piggyback on that comment.
Yeah,
But,
I mean,
but
I bet.
but what I love, what I love most is this right now. And like I feel like I struggle on social media to post enough, to write enough description. Like there's so much I want to say about blooms that I feel like I just haven't been able to express on Twitter. And it's so frustrating. But like this setting, and I said it in a post about how excited I was for this format, and I truly mean it because I think this is more of what's missing from the space. Being able to hear the words from the artist, being able to walk around this virtual environment. This is like a beautiful, you know, setting to look at art together. Like people could be all over the world doing this at the same time. I think this is what's really missing because it's you put a post on Twitter and you're just hoping, that the algorithm is going to push it out to enough people and you're going to get enough retweets and it's very hard to truly express yourself on Twitter, right? I mean, it's painful. This to me, this I love. This is fun. I really hope I get to do more of these.
That's amazing, Corey. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I mean, the reason why I started these walk and talks was because of that. Like we have so many Twitter spaces, there's so many threads, there's just so much online, but it's not all of it is around the arts. Like being in a space where we can see the art and then talk about the art that we're looking at all together from all around the world. Like this is
Yeah.
what this technology can unlock. And this is, in my opinion, how we should be viewing this digital work, like all together, talking
Yeah.
about it in one space. And it's like the genesis of Walk and Talks came from my grandfather, who was a painter. So like whenever I'd go over to his house, he would like bring me to a studio and we'd just walk around and he would tell me about his works. So when I was listening to Twitter spaces, I'm like, why am I not seeing what the artist is talking about? Like
Right.
this is just such a missing piece. So
How can
I'm
you learn? Sorry. Go ahead.
no, for sure. Yeah, I mean it's hard to understand what you're talking about when it comes to color choice or form. It's like I
Right.
need to see what you're talking about. So I think this format allows for both the artists to express what they want to talk about and for us as the viewers and potential collectors to understand more about the work. And I think this just leads to even deeper connections to it as well.
Yeah. No. Absolutely. I forget what I was going to say, but yes, we need more of this.
Amazing. I'm sure I'll come back to you, but I know we've got a few minutes left here, and you mentioned that you've got so much to say about Blooms. Just wanted to make sure if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about this project, we made sure that we had time for it.
Um, yeah, I mean, the questions are really good, pretty thorough. I feel like I've definitely been able to get a lot more out in this, hour than on all the posts so far. I hope to be able to make a post, before Wednesday on a lot of these, a lot of these things that have come out. Um, but yeah, I think just mainly that I'm very, just very grateful and happy to be able to do this and to be able to make art that connects with other people. I never, sort of as you started saying earlier, I never thought, that I'd have these kinds of moments. Um, loved art my whole life and never participated in any community. Um, Never felt a part of any artistic community or movement. So I think just grateful to be alive and be able to do what I'm doing right now, and hopefully connecting with people that feel the same way. So thank you.
I love it. Yeah, thank you, Corey. This was phenomenal. For everybody in the audience that wants to learn more about Bloom, so there's on Verse, it's releasing the public sale. Is it Wednesday or Thursday? Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of the next steps if somebody's interested in learning more about the project?
Yep. Yeah, public sale. There's 100 remaining pieces, 200 total collection size. So 100 pieces will be on auction on Verse Wednesday, ending Thursday. I think 2 p.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday of this week. Um, yeah.
Amazing. Well, yeah, if anyone else has any additional questions, yeah, definitely check out the Verse website. There's a lot of information for you over there. Again, yeah, auction looks like opening March 27th. So thank you again, Cory, for walking us through your artwork. This was so much fun. And yeah, just building this gallery, like my wife walked in, she's like, "What is this?" I'm like, "This is a gallery that I'm building for an upcoming walk and talk." So it passed the wife test with flying colors. So
Love it.
definitely
Love it.
needed to give you that shout out because I know on like the Waiting to Be Signed podcast, the wife test is a very important test. So
Yep.
you definitely passed.
Glad to hear it.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. This was so much fun. And yeah, thank you to everybody in the audience for coming in, stepping into the gallery, coming onto the Twitter space. I really appreciate it and hope everybody has a great rest of your day. And I'll see you all here later.
Awesome. Thank you so much.